not all agents really care about that. Or if they do, it's hard to intertwine it. So, mostly you're trying to get your sales and, make your commissions and, really serve your clients from, are you making a good investment? Are you buying a good home? Are you in a good area? Helping them with inspections and all that. But, for me having my eyes opened to the health side of things has made me feel like I have an obligation to educate the market and people and stuff like that. So
Henry Valles with Christie's International Real Estate. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, my friend?
Good. Thank you for coming on and talking to us about the wonderful world of Henry Valles.
Yeah. Let's you tell me what you want to know.
Let's set the stage. Henry and I have known each other for a long time because we are cousins.
Yes.
Henry and I have gone on a similar journey of life together. I moved from Ohio when I was 9 or 10, and you were in Miami, and also moved to Austin around the same time. So we are both only children, and we both grew up together. Age difference about 12 years, 13 years.
I'm 40. You're
29, so 11 years.
Yeah,
11 years. As I was growing up in Austin, you were, kind of doing your thing as well. And then a lot of your similar interests actually tied into a lot of what you're doing today, and what I also became passionate about later down the road. So I think in general, we're going to have multiple conversations on this platform, diving into the different worlds that you've become really an expert in. So set the table for who Henry Valles is today, and then we'll start to backtrack and go through the interesting things that you've been a part of.
Yeah. So been working in real estate for almost 15 years now. Got my license in 2010 in May. Moved here from Miami when I was 22 to finish school, and just ended up loving Austin and staying here. Main reason why was because your mom and dad moved here and just wanted to finish school and go back home. But Austin just kept me here, as amazing of a city as it is. So when I when I graduated college from finance, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Had a couple jobs. One of them was with your mom as her office manager. That didn't really work out great. I'm not the office manager type, and got my real estate license. And I was actually getting my license before I left Miami, but put that on the back burner until I graduated and figure out what I wanted to do, and kind of just got into it. Started off with a great team, Matt and Barbara Ditlow. Started selling new construction townhome condos and started building my business that way. And luckily, throughout that journey, found a passion for healthy and sustainable building. And you were at the genesis of that journey. Found a Facebook group that just talked about a bunch of alternative different things. And it had a post about, hempcrete, fire resistant, pest resistant, mold resistant, and was dealing with a lot of new construction at that time. And I was like, God, our construction is really poor quality in this city. Most of the mainstream stuff, unless you have like high-end builders and things like that. And I was like, what is this? This is weird. This sounds great. And it was like a Facebook flyer to go to this hempcrete workshop that was put on by the Hemp Industry Association. So,
and it was right outside of Loveland, Colorado, where we had family, and so that was a great introduction to that space.
Yeah, it was. I had no idea what to expect. So, ended up going to Vermont with Matt at that time. To go check out his hometown, but we took a carpentry class at a sustainable building school called Yestermile in Vermont. Incredible place. And from there, did a little traveling. And then right when I got back, I left to Colorado to go to this hemp building workshop. It was put on by the Hemp Industry Association. They're essentially were the advocacy group for the entire hemp industry. And they brought in a man named Steve Allen, He's the founder of the International Hemp Building Association, mostly based in Europe. And this was back in 2014. So hemp really hadn't been legalized yet at that time. And I never really heard of hemp. I've heard of its cousin and the other things that comes with. And um, yeah, just was hearing this older Irish guy talk about hempcrete and hemp building and talking about vapor open walls. And, we had about 3-4 hours, half a day of just like slides and, just some more literature work and, getting to know the product, the history, and why are they building this way compared to our standard, ways of construction. And then we spent the rest of the time actually building like a hempcrete little yoga studio for someone outside of in Berthoud, Colorado. Beautiful piece of land. And in the middle of that, it just like opened my eyes. Like I thought it would have such a profound effect on me as it has now. And we'll talk about kind of how that journey has evolved, mainly focused from hemp, but to other aspects in building science and healthy, construction and materials. But that really took me down a journey of doing hemp advocacy in Texas. So Hemp Industry Association started state chapters at that time. And I co-founded the Texas chapter of the Hemp Industry Association, along with some other people, Coleman Hemphill and Sheila Hemphill and others here in the state. And we really advocated for the legalization of industrial hemp. But coming back, working in real estate again and seeing so many clients with, health issues and mold issues and all that, I was like, man, we have to find a way to bring this to, the Austin market and educate people on it. So a lot of that hemp advocacy work was just also followed by me just wanting to go to every like hempcrete workshop I can go to, or anywhere I went, I wanted to see what they were doing with hempcrete. And so did a hempcrete workshop out in Marfa that I really got hands on. Like I thought I was paying to learn, but I was actually paying to work, which was great. And it was fun. It discovered Marfa in that. And then Steve Allen, I've always wanted to go to his his International Hemp Building Symposium, but it was in Europe, so it was a little bit harder, time-wise and work-wise. But he had one in Canada, in Montreal, and that was the first time it really, opened my eyes of like, hey, there's actually markets that are doing, hempcrete and hemp building and all that. And, we had 7, 8, 9, 10 presentations of projects in Europe and projects in Mexico and, large scale commercial projects to, multi-unit townhomes. And it was like, oh, wow, like this is happening right now. So yeah, it's been, and, throughout my career that they've always kind of been, parallel to each other. My standard real estate career, residential, buying, selling, helping investors, all that hadn't really merged with kind of my, passion for hemp building. And yeah, I think it's been, a long journey trying to continue to figure out how they can intertwine. And, like I mentioned before, it's more, being solely focused on hemp building or hempcrete, which funny enough, just finished helping host a sprayed applied hempcrete workshop in Austin with Cameron McIntosh and Damian Balmer of Americhanvre and Urizi. So I still have that passion on bringing it to the mainstream, but I've kind of expanded and involved it more to, healthy materials, to passive house, which is really trying to improve the standard of the quality of construction and efficiency. Trying to find methods of, making things more mold resistant and just, we're just bombarded by, toxic materials. So how can we educate the market on improving their air quality, improving the materials that they choose? Because ultimately that's part of, real estate. Not all agents really care about that. or if they do, it's hard to intertwine it. So, mostly you're trying to get your sales and, make your commissions and, really serve your clients from, are you making a good investment? Are you buying a good home? Are you in a good area? Helping them with inspections and all that. But, for me having my eyes opened to the health side of things has made me feel like I have an obligation to educate the market and people and stuff like that. So I don't know if that's somewhat of an intro that you wanted, but
That was
we're
great.
going.
Yeah, no, you talked about the big components there. I think if we go back to when you got your real estate license and when you started to get into the real estate game in Austin, can you bring us back to that time period? Because Austin has changed so much from 2007, 8, 9, especially, but even in the last 10 years specifically, like the amount of buildings that have gone up has been crazy. The infiltration from different markets of consumers has changed. Yeah. What were some of the things that you remember, at least from that time period, that is a world of difference compared to now?
Yeah, at that time, when I got into the market and really started working real estate full time, I got my license in 2010, but really started working in the market full time, like end of 2011, 12. We were just starting to get out of kind of the financial crisis of 2008, the housing bubble at that time. People were getting, non-income mortgages and, there's a lot of speculative buying. And I wasn't as educated in the market at that time when I first got into it and graduated. But compared to a lot of other markets coming from Miami, and me going back and forth, markets like Miami, like Vegas, like Phoenix, they had really hard downturns at that time. But Austin kind of stayed steady. And just Texas in general, the job market was stronger when I graduated, in Texas versus, back home in Miami, depending what industry you wanted to get in. And I think at that time, Austin was, hadn't experienced the rapid growth that it had. I think it was just starting to, get out of, that financial turbulent period.
It was blossoming.
Yeah, starting to, for sure. And I think people always saw, the potential there. And I think there are a lot of builders that, a couple of the projects that we worked on were foreclosed properties that the developer and investor took over. And there are a lot of builders that got wiped out during that time. Like there's some neighborhoods you go back and, it was a certain style, and then the new style that they're building now was because that developer, got knocked out in 2007, 8, 9, 10, right? So, but I think the potential for Austin, was seen. I don't think as much as it started to evolve. Really we started to see, a lot of that pickup of, when we were getting rated as like the top city for everything, right? Like, everyone wanted to be here for South by Southwest and ACL. And, there was a good job market, tech market, but it wasn't as robust as it is now, right? We didn't have the Facebooks and the Amazon and the Teslas and, the Samsungs and all of that. And I think the main attraction was like, hey, there's job opportunity. It was affordable, like compared to other cities, like, really, and you could be older from Austin and be like, well, back in the 80s, 90s or whatever, 2000s. But from what I know, being, in my 20s, way more affordable than what Miami was. And just the lifestyle, right? Like people loved, the music scene, the food was really good. It was affordable, like had a great downtown, presence, but you didn't feel like you were in a big city. But you would go see these incredible shows and you had such incredible nature around you. Like I was, born and raised in Miami. I'm a huge beach guy, but I felt like I didn't really like need to miss it as much because we had our green belts and, the lakes and, the hiking and, it was a different style of, nature that you were getting into. And
it's the same reason why so many people are still flocking to Austin today.
Yeah.
It was a different scene and it was up and coming to where people were coming to Austin for vacation or they were coming for South by Southwest and they were like, man, we got to live here full time.
And kids, right? Like you got, it's huge university cities, like multiple, right? You got UT, you got, St. Ed's and San Marcos, Texas State, and it's so many universities around the area. So, you also have a lot of parents and people coming here, the tech industry, you have second homes for people, on Lake Austin or out in Marble Falls or in the surrounding areas, the wine country, the hill country that's, really grown a lot. And so, out of all the cities, people really always want to come here. That's everything's, big events are happening here. And, we really started to see that growth, 2012, 13, 14, 15, and I think it started like to really, vibe out, around, when you start getting to 16, 17, 18. And then, we really were just constantly going up and up. And then COVID came and, no one was sure what was going to happen for a few months. And then it just went insane, like a lot of other markets.
Totally.
And so during that time, that's like when we became like, I think like a big boy city, big city. And you had all these big investments like Tesla. And, I know we had the Formula One track, but a little bit before, but that was a big thing that put us on the global stage. And South by Southwest got bigger, and ACL, and,
Austin FC.
Austin FC. We have a professional soccer team now, and you have, the Dells and the Samsungs, and Apple was building a campus, and Facebook was bringing a headquarters. It was like there was a month or if 2-3 months that like just every other week there was an announcement of like a huge corporation, and you just had people flocking from all over the country, and that really expanded the growth, and really sucked up our inventory, and prices just exploded. And we're having a correction now. We're trying to see like where the dust settles, where we'll be at. We had exponential growth, almost like 50 to 100% in certain neighborhoods and areas over the past 10 years, and a lot, like almost 50% in, those like 2020 to 2022 time period when things were bonkers. But we're trying to see, where the correction is now. But regardless of what happens, Austin still, has its core, right? Like we have a lot of the big huge buildings now, like a bunch of condos and office buildings, and South Congress has been totally, redeveloped, and you have the Domain that keeps expanding, and all these like quote unquote domain like developments, and, all these, neighborhoods that have started to pop up during that time. But yeah, it's just, it's interesting to see what the next, 10, 20 years will be. I'm excited for it. I love Austin. It's still, its essences might have changed a little bit, but its core is still there. I think, people also come here because it's such a unique mindset too, right? Like I think that's also part of like the attraction of the market is you have all these entrepreneurial mindsets. Like, you have a lot of health conscious people, and the biohackers and the techies and all of those things that like, you really don't see in a lot of other cities, right? Like it's like a true like healthy mindset. And one of the big things too was like people loved all the farmers markets, and like Austin was one of the first big like farm to market, farm to table markets and things like that. And that's why I think the culinary scene is so great here. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see, where it's at now and where it'll go and where it came from, for sure.
Yeah, and you have, especially going off the health focus, you have the Sprouts and the Wheatsvilles and the central markets like all intertwined, right? The Whole Foods location is in downtown Austin.
Headquarters, yeah.
Headquarters, right. So you did an incredible job of setting that stage. It brought me back to some of those time periods that, I'd kind of forgotten that whole timeline of events, because there were so many things about Austin that we look at now in a sort of remembrance way, but it's still the things that we get to enjoy today. I think you're absolutely right, at least from the small city mindset where we can have all of these conglomerate of people. It still feels small. It still feels like we run into these people and can go see someone that we're interested in on an everyday basis, but it still also, is a big enough city now, especially the next 10 to 20 years when we start to expand into Georgetown, into San Marcos, and maybe this I-35 corridor between San Antonio and Waco really expands.
Yeah, it's that Texas Triangle is no joke. Economically, it's probably one of the biggest powerhouses in the whole world right now. And, you just think about it location wise, like between, we're like literally smack in the middle between Canada and Mexico of like North America. Like you couldn't be more geographically better located, even just within the US, right? To go to California or Seattle or New York or Florida, you're always, you're just a 4 to 5 hour flight away, unless you go and, across the oceans or something like that.
Definitely.
And so yeah, it's interesting to see, and exciting, and a lot of those unique aspects that Austin has brought people together and love so much. I think from a real estate perspective, we're going to bring it back to that, and like from a building perspective, um, it's you meet so many different unique people in that regard too, right? Like you have a great real estate market, but also a lot of people here been into natural building for a really long time. They've had groups like Design, Build, Live, and the Earth and Construction Initiative that are like more like natural based building materials, like rammed earth and earth compressed earth blocks and straw bale and all those things that people have been trying to do that. And you see these like cool projects around Austin. Like one of your mom's friends had like an incredible rammed earth house that we just pulled up on, and we're like, what is this? And in like a really good neighborhood, and we're like, wow. But Austin has always kind of been a great hub for that. And I think not only with hemp, but the passive house community here is really great. That's a group of people that to me compares a lot to like kind of like the hemp building community. It's like really passionate, really strong core. But if you want to get into anything in that regard and learn more and just like improve that like quality of what you're doing, Austin is just like such a great hub for that.
Definitely. And you were talking about how your real estate profession and your love for building science like intertwined. I feel like the introduction of the hemp building while you were seeing these new construction houses, like you were seeing the poor quality of it, and then you saw hempcrete as an alternative, but then you started to look at things different. And so when we started to get into the 2018, 2019, where the massive expansion came in Austin, you had all of these builders come in from God knows where to start building houses. Yeah. And now you're talking about the climate in Austin changing from more of a hot desert feel to a much more humid climate. Now the building materials and the types of buildings that you were seeing issues with. You were seeing some mold pop up, and now you're really looking at other building alternatives and starting to go down that avenue to find why my house is having issues at 2 years old, right? So I think it is a beautiful way that your education component and your curiosity basically combined into your passions.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't getting into this, I started off at new construction, right? So we were, my first part of my career was doing pre-sales to final walkthroughs and delivery, to the people that are buying these new construction townhomes. And so you see that whole process, you see the guts of the home, but, like everything in life with repetition, you get more and more educated on it. And you just see kind of like the quality of construction, the standard way of building, the building process. And that's not to say like there's not good like conventional, builders that do, standard conventional construction. But when you start to see that, it really opens your eyes as to like, okay, why did this fail? Or why on some of these new construction homes, there are already mold issues. Like you mentioned, Austin was expanding so quickly that investors were just coming in here, throwing stuff up. They can sell it. Like you can throw, anything on the market and it would sell. Now it's a little bit different, right? Like you got to have a good quality product, but at the same time, you can have something that looks like a good quality product and putting makeup on a pig essentially. And that's not even from like an old home flip perspective. That's like new construction. Like you don't even know the guts of your home, right? So as I learned that process, I learned about, what are the important inspections to do? Because when you're taught in real estate, most of the time, as you get older, obviously you have, if you have a pool, you get a pool inspection. But, usually you just have your standard home inspection and you feel like, yeah, you're fine. Like, but as I've learned is, okay, you do your standard home inspection and then, hey, like your HVAC is one of the most important systems in your home. And we've done many, HVAC inspections together, and how many HVAC systems have had mold in them, and trying to figure out what's the source of that. And then you go, hey, you should have a mold inspection, right? Regardless if you feel like there's an issue or not. But sometimes you can't even see if there is one. And, unfortunately in this industry, it is such a taboo topic to talk about, but it is one of the most critical inspections that could affect your health. Like the amount and part of the passion that I've really, has grown in me is seeing so many people affected by mold, like literally debilitating issues from, neurological development issues in children to autoimmune diseases in people to just brain fog or just trying to be your optimal self, right? Like that's so critical. And, we live in this world of like biohacking and taking our supplements and doing our cold plunges and saunas and, grounding and like doing everything to get your body optimally perfect, right? To like be your best self and get in a flow state. But we're not talking about, the four walls around us that we're in 90% of our life, right? Like people don't realize how much we're inside these homes and what air you're breathing and how that's affecting you no matter what you do, right? So, those inspections, really became something that I know it's a little bit of a cost burden to certain buyers, but ultimately you're discovering issues that are going to cost you way more financially and potentially health wise. On what you can discover and help remedy it, right? And if you love the home and you're willing to make it work, if it's a new if it's a resale or a new construction, you know what you're getting into, right? So it's been interesting. I've definitely in my career probably lost a lot of deals because of it, but I don't lose sleep over it because I know that like I'm doing the best for that client, and I know that I have a clean conscience in that regard. I give them the information. Ultimately, they're the decision makers, right? I can only provide the information and help guide them to the resources that can help uncover that, and ultimately decide, hey, do you want to deal with this or not? This house has some issues. Nope, we love it. We love the area. We love the floor plan. We're going to remodel. We're going to take these things into consideration. Nope, that's too much work for me. Whatever that might be, but you're presenting that information.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, the education component. I mean, they're making one of the biggest purchases of their life, right? So they want to be aware of all of the issues that could possibly be behind the walls, especially. I mean, I know of a lot just off the top of my head of the issues that we've uncovered, not only from the HVAC inspection, from the other detailed inspections that, you at least present to your buyers as, hey, this is what I would recommend you do as inspection wise when we walk into this house, because you've seen enough issues from the HVAC side specifically, but also the mold side, the plumbing side, totally. and you've developed your list of contractors to call when you have something specific to a trade that you want to check out inside of a home. There was one that jumps to the top of mind specifically that, the HVAC had a certain amount of issues, and then it was cast iron pipes, and then it was you got the mold test, and there was mold specifically high in the living room, and it was very strange. And it did seem like when they did the snake for the cast iron piping, there was probably a leak in the cast iron underneath the slab in the living room specifically. And now you uncover, not only did you probably have a leak, or you had a leak in the cast iron piping, but it was affecting the indoor air quality so much that now you have mold in the living room. I mean, but you need three different people
who knows,
plus the home inspector.
Yeah. And who knows like what that mold could have been, right? And ultimately, not to disclose, too much, but we ended up finding out like not everything was disclosed to us, right? But, totally. The way I look at that is, and I remember another deal last year is, someone might feel like it's overkill to do all these inspections, but they all have different inspectors with a different set of eyes, right? You have your main home inspector who's more of a, general inspection, right? And there's some really good ones out there that'll lead you to that. Then you have your HVAC inspector, and then you have a mold inspector who's also going to do some thermal imaging and check moisture and like see if there's high spores or whatever for whatever reason, right? Like Austin is a moldy city. Like one thing I have to say I don't love about Austin is the allergies, and like, man, it is, not to the brink that you want to move, but sometimes you're like, man, I can't take this anymore. So like you have to test the outside mold spores to make sure, that they're, that your inside mold, counts are higher, right? Because that's how moldy of a city we are to a degree. So, but then you have your plumbers, and you have, your roof inspections and all these things. And, sometimes the main home inspector, the mold inspector doesn't catch something that the HVAC guy does. And then, or the mold inspector caught something that, and not even being mold, maybe just like a moisture thing that the main home inspector and the HVAC company or the plumber couldn't catch or whatever that is. And so you start to like piece together this puzzle and try to get a clear, as clear of a picture as you can, especially in resale. New construction is much more straightforward in that regard. You have like your 3-phase inspections: foundation, pre-drywall, and like your final inspection. Hopefully, if you can do all 3 of them, you feel good as you can, and you still have your issues. But older homes, you have no idea what you're going through, and you still discover things, right? But at least then you have a much, higher head start than you would have, instead of just like trying to be like, hey, why is this an issue? What's that an issue? Or be like, hey, I just walked into $50,000 instead of $20,000 of work that I was expecting to do. So, regardless if you're, first time home buyer, or it's your homestead, or you're an investor, because that's part of your investment. And you also want the habitat that you're giving your renters to be good too, I would hope, to be part of your equation.
It's shocking when I talk to you about your process, and I see how most other realtors guide their buyer through the buying experience. One, it's a world of a difference, and two, like, I'm shocked that more buyers have, there should be more buyer's remorse with the lack of inspections that are done on most properties. Because, as the HVAC guy specifically, we get a lot of calls from people that bought a house 1 to 2 years ago, that when we walk into that home, like, we're talking about some major issues inside of that house, that the general inspector is not an HVAC guy. He doesn't understand all of the ins and outs from not only the HVAC system, but also the ductwork. The ventilation is a big one as well, that, the home inspector is there from a general standpoint to really find major issues. But when you have specific inspectors from different trades go out, they are looking at different things. Like you said, a different set of eyes on multiple different things. And there's going to be some overlap in between. And you're putting together this puzzle piece. You're putting together pieces of the puzzle that at the end of the day, your buyer is now able to look at, and they're able to say, am I going to be comfortable in this house 10 to 15 years down the line? And how much money am I going to be putting inside this home 10 to 15 years down the line?
Yeah.
So you're really setting your buyers up for success, at least in terms of what they can expect.
Yeah, for sure. And, I would want that done for me, right? Like, if I wasn't a real estate agent and, I had an agent for myself, like, you would want done to you as, you want to do to others. So yeah, it's, sometimes people's motivations are different. And, most agents are good out there. I think they're well intended. What I've also seen is we're just not educated as an industry on a lot of these things, right? So you're just going based off, hey, you just need to know the basics of a home. How do you sell? How do you keep in touch with your clients? How do you run a market analysis? Obviously there's a lot of deep things that we do, as agents, like your market, like, from a buy side, like, you're helping them find the property, if you're a good agent, you're helping find off market stuff for them. Then they find the home, and you're running them through the contract, and you're running comps and all the things. And like, we do, so like, there's like a list out there that the NAR puts out, like 162 things that like your agent does for you, right? When, they're trying to devalue the value of a real estate agent these days, right? So, and that does barely even includes like building science stuff, like knowing how the house actually works, right? And so, yeah, is that like a level above than most? Yeah, for sure. But ultimately, I think everyone wants to know that, right? And I think some people just want a home and they don't know any better, right? And that's fine. But ultimately, we want to improve the quality of our homes, because I think everyone, that you talk to most of the time sometimes say is like, man, the quality of our stuff has just really gone down, right? And that's in everything in life, like from our electronics to our appliances to our homes to our cars. Like, some things are great and they work great, but the lifespan of them has gotten so short. It's like, it's pretty wasteful. So like, how do we get back to and especially being your home, probably your most expensive purchase and your most valuable asset, to having something that's going to last a long time and last quality, not just having to gut your home every 30 to 50 years and build it brand new again. Like obviously things change and technologies change, but we're doing that because a lot of the materials are just like not great and are toxic and just haven't withheld the test of time, and they've just been worn in. So how do we improve that? How do you improve better air quality, better humidity control, helps your home last longer, like all those things, like proper design so you don't have water intrusion and backsplashing and deteriorating siding and all these things that people just sometimes don't think about because they go, oh man, that house is really cool, it's super modern, it's has no overhangs, it's just like no roof line. It's like cool, like that, it does look pretty badass, but some aspects it's what are you sacrificing there, you know what I mean? And so I think educating people on that, I think will hopefully start to open their eyes.
It came from educating yourself though, and more so when I point out the differences between you and other realtors. I think you touched on the education component, and I think it's important to point out that the state only needs a certain amount of information from you and a certain amount of testing from you to give you a license for real estate, right? So it's not like the state is bringing you a handbook to go through all of the things that you just mentioned, which is a mouthful.
No.
And man, that is a scary list when I'm looking at a house, and I've now got you as my realtor saying, hey, we really need to look at these things, right? So you're a magician to be able to carefully tread the line of being that building science person and knowing that someone's fallen in love with a house and they have their own wants and dreams, and they've already put the kids in the bedroom inside of this house that they're walking through.
Yeah, no, for sure. And look, when you sign up as a real estate agent and broker, you're not, you don't sign up for that. You sign up to help your buyers and your sellers and your investors and your developers and your clients, right? Like I totally understand that part. And at the same time, I also feel there's a huge desire out there for this improvement of like quality of construction, taking building science into account, taking more healthy, sustainable building practices. And from what I've seen, and, correct me if I'm wrong too, like there's builders out there, that are interested and want to do this. There's architects and engineers, groups. And maybe I'm in Austin and I live in this bubble, and this is like the community I've created around myself, but there are a bunch of architects that want to do this stuff. Like I'm part of the Passive House Alliance group in Austin, for the chapter here. And, I'm volunteering as their treasurer this year, but we had this like brainstorming meeting, and it's like, what is holding us back, right? At least from a passive house perspective, like wanting, there's owners that want to do it. There's builders that want to do it, but like the projects aren't being had, right? And I think what we, filtered it down to is just education, right? In many different aspects, right? Like educating owners and property owners, like why would you want, just even a passive house, right? Which passive house essentially is a certification, a third-party certification that takes into account a much higher quality of build, really takes into account your envelope of your home, the different layers, takes into account, the efficiency of your appliances, your plumbing system, your HVAC design is huge in passive house as well.
The orientation of the home.
Orientation, all the things that you can think of, right?
And you go to the word passive, and it basically stems from being able to produce more electricity than you are sucking up.
Yeah, or reduce as much as possible, right? Like even like passive design, or passive solar design, like that's more of like a natural building thing. It's like, hey, look, we're going to orient our house in a way that we're going to, get, the morning sun on this side, and then the heat load on the house that doesn't need to be cooled as much or heated as much, depending on, what region you're in. But, with more of like the FIAS passive house, standards is of, really taking into account every aspect of your home, from the layering of your home to protect you from water intrusion and building a really tight house, which, a lot of people can debate that or not, but you build a tight house, you're going to have, less thermal bridging, less, heat, cold intrusion,
Air changes per hour.
air changes, and you're going to really consider how you're ventilating things, what type of appliances you're using. Your plumbing systems usually have like a hot water recirculator, so you're not taking, one of the standards is like, hey, if your hot water comes to your sink in 30 seconds, like that's part of the approval process. Like that makes sense, because how long do we just wait there and just let water run for 2-3 minutes, just getting to the temperature we want, right? Like those nuances. And yeah, does that cost you more? Yes. But ultimately, operationally, that is going to cost you less in the long run and improve the quality of your home, because it's not even about like the materials and what you're using. It's the standard of construction. To get a certification for that makes the contractors have to improve the quality of the work that they're doing, right? Like you can probably build a standard home pretty decently, but you have a bunch of air gaps, you have a bunch of thermal bridging. If you just spray foam, your little mistakes away, like how many problems does that cause, right? So, it's really interesting to see the differences and the market evolve in that regard. And, going back to what I was saying, like we're just sitting in this like, Passive House awesome meeting of like, what do we need to do to bridge that gap? And I think it really is education on all fronts, from owners to builders that want to do it, but they feel like they don't have the subs that are skilled enough to do it. So we have to educate them. We have to educate the city and, the code approvals, as to why, we should implement more Passive House standard, building code, which, I used to be, and it still kind of am, someone that doesn't like as much regulation, but, and kind of come a little bit more from like a libertarian standpoint. But man, when you see the construction out there, you're like, no, code is like practically D plus in a lot of cities, right? Like just to get standard building code pass, you're probably like around a D plus, taking that up to like an A plus and really improve the standard of our buildings is going to have incredible benefits on multiple aspects for the homeowners, for the builders, for the city, for our grid. So many things that we don't even really think about.
Yeah. And to tangent on that slightly, I think when we look at the laws that are in place, when we look at the building code specifically, there are a lot of faults, right? So we already know that there's building codes in place, and we know that they are not up to a standard that can prevent a lot of issues for homeowners that really don't know the difference. Yeah. A homeowner that doesn't have a realtor like you is going to walk into a new house and think that it's exactly like the other house that they just walked into. It's just a different color, it's a different shape, it has different quirks and features, but the rest of the house is the same. When we start to look at the building features and the upgraded building techniques that would be basically mandated, I mean, I think the biggest thing from my standpoint is the cost making it cost prohibitive for a first-time home buyer, right? Because we had already touched on, at least from the perspective of prices in Austin, they were through the roof for a certain amount of time. They've started to equalize, and I'm sure we'll hit another breaking point at some time. But when we start to mandate additional resources to go in a home, obviously that's going to bring the home prices up farther, but you also are going to have less issues. You're going to have less electricity, right? So you're going to have some cost savings, but then you're also bringing it to a homeowner that is at least less knowledgeable than people like us, maybe.
Yeah. And I think, I would put it out there that the homeowner knows and feels the quality of a house too, right? Like one of the things, going back to the hemp creed and the hemp building stuff, when you walk into a house, like you can talk about conceptually the properties of a house and why you should do, but until you walk into one, you go like, oh, okay, I got it. right? And like same thing with like a passive house, or same thing with like, very thoughtful, healthy natural build or whatever. Like you have to touch, see, and feel it. And I think the consumer, if they had more of that, they would really feel the experience. And also I think the way I see it too is like a lot of these great builders, who started off as spec builders and all that, who built a really good quality home or did passive house or did, high end and, really quality stuff. They end up being custom home builders because everyone wants to hire them, right? And it's a lot less risk to be a custom home builder than it is to be a speculative builder sometimes. And so, when it comes to the city stuff, it's interesting because luckily, again, coming back to Austin, like we're really progressive in a lot of these things. Like the city of Austin is looking into passive house initiatives for affordable housing. They just, I think there's a grant program, that some of the people at Passive House Austin has been working on. A good friend of mine, Trey Farmer with Forgecraft, has been helping with that initiative to give like a $2,000 credit per unit for affordable housing units here in Austin to get them passive house certified. Part of that is, helping subsidize that cost, right? And so inevitably we've subsidized many industries out there. Like a big one that I always refer to is solar, right? Like how did solar become so prominent, right? Is because we had so many federal tax rebates, city tax rebates, all these deals to really get that industry going, right? And what was that for? For sustainability, for energy efficiency, whatever that might be. Why can't we apply that to just the structure itself, right?
And
Like
healthier living.
healthier. And ultimately, to me, don't get me wrong, I love solar for the certain things, that it should be applied to, right? But sometimes people just like put a bunch of solar panels on a 1950s home and they're just like, yeah, like this is really energy efficiency, like really energy efficient for you. And at least here in Austin, the numbers really don't make sense that much when it comes to how cheap our energy is here. Sometimes people might be like, hey, our energy bill is going up, but relatively to the rest of the country, we're pretty cheap. Sometimes that doesn't make sense to just get solar panels and subsidize that versus, hey, let's look at the envelope of our home, right? Is it like, do we have a bunch of gaps everywhere? Are we well insulated in our attic? Do we have a radiant barrier? There's so many little things that are such a higher, dollar, ROI that you can put back and like money in your pocket without having to spend 30, 40, 50 grand on a solar system. And some people might not even know what their like, what their timeline of their investment to be returned is. So, sometimes it makes sense, but people really need to like break down the numbers. And if you're just covering your energy costs and replacing it with a solar mortgage, you're not making any money. Like your payback period might be 20 years instead of like doing some insulation, getting maybe some new windows, or like considering the envelope of your home before you do that. And so I think that building, like improving the building code and investing in that, investing in the structures, investing in better, third-party certification of better quality builds, or investing in materials that really, improve just the health of a home or the efficiency of a home, I think could be really effective.
A lot of the conversations that we've had, you are a wealth of knowledge, by the way. And every time we go deep into these discussions, it's crazy how much information you're able to retain and pull from. I know it's I
don't feel that way sometimes.
The hundreds of trainings that you've been to in the all the different topics that we've touched on. I think what has impacted me the most when we start to talk about sustainable building, and we look at the codes and we say, okay, how can we make things more efficient? How can we make them healthier? How can we build a tighter envelope? There's a certain amount that we are going towards a passive house standard, and we're still using terrible construction practices, right? Spray foam I would put on one of the top of the list because that's at least the more well-known, at least in terms of the chemicals going into it, right?
Totally.
When you talked about rammed earth, that was kind of jogging a memory of mine where I remember hearing some of these builders that are more specific to locations that they're now pulling from 50 miles away from the building site and building out of materials that are close to home.
Yeah.
Versus, great, you can make this super high efficient passive house, and now you got to spend $4 million and we're going to ship materials. Like it's super carbon neutral, right? Yeah. But we've got to pull materials from China and ship it on a boat to get here. What would be, at least in the Austin world, just out of my curiosity, what would be from the Austin world some of the more sustainable building practices that we could use that are more close to home?
Yeah, the rest of like your standard construction materials are really, I would love to know. I'm sure we get a lot of cedar from here, people making their own cabinetry, maybe some wood, but a lot of it, like you said, is imported, exported, all those things. One of the main reasons why I was so passionate about hemp building too was its like potential for a circular economy, right? Like not only did I love the fact that just the building science aspect around it, the health aspects, the vapor openness and all of that. But hey, if you ultimately in a dream perfect world, you can source your hemp insulation from your local farmer, right? Or within your same state that was processed there, delivered there. Hempcrete or hemp lime construction is a mixture of like a natural lime binder, a natural cement mixed with the woody core of the hemp stalk. And that's put into your walls like a lightweight concrete insulation replacement. You can source your lime, your hydrated lime, your pozzolans locally anywhere in the state, in the state or in the country, wherever that might be. You work with your local materials. So, I think hempcrete's a great one. Ramder's a great one. Compressed earth blocks are great ones to talk about. Straw bale, like talk about, how much, straw is out there on all these farms that we have. It just depends like what is your goal in terms of like the performance and the type of house that you want and the feel that you want, right? So I think those are, going back to hemp because, I love my hempcrete and my hemp community, but I haven't really seen anything that like I've, seen, touched and felt that like could be so localized, right? And just, during our, with the Mayor Chambra's sprayed applied hempcrete contractor training, we toured 2 houses here in Austin. One of the homes sourced hemp hurd from a farm out in Taylor, Lucas Evans, with E3 technologies, and they sourced like a hemp binder. It was from Mexico, not the same country, but I consider Mexico our region, right? We can talk about those nuances. And you can get your plasters and stuff here locally too. There's a place, Austin Lime Works, that was, providing hydraulic lime if you wanted to make your own mixture, and then you get a local pozzolan. Like, talk about a local, economy for your building industry, which, I dubbed it kind of like, the farm to table movement. Like we should really have a, farm to home movement, right? To really know where are your materials coming from and how do we localize that, and talk about like really putting that in the spotlight during COVID. It was like, well, all your construction materials just went up crazy because all this lumber, and then we import a bunch of stuff from China, and like the supply chain just went like totally dead for a second, and we couldn't really import much. It was like, all right, well, that really like brought a wake up call to us. It was like, hey, maybe we should start regionalizing our supply chains again. And so, I think we don't really talk about that a lot in the building industry. And, we talk about, the spray foam and the fiberglass and, its pros and cons. And, you spray foam your entire house, you're going to feel like you're in a nice cocoon, right? You open up that attic door and it's 78 in there and it's 74 in your house. And, but you don't have spray foam. It's like 110 up there, and
140, baby,
140, and it's 80 or like whatever in your house, and
all you have separating you is just a tiny little piece of fiberglass and drywall.
Yeah. And that's where go back to my passive house people, you really talk about like exterior continuous insulations and rain screens and water shedding and building that cocoon without really having to spray foam everything. And I think some of the knocks that we've had on the passive house community in the past is like we use a lot of petroleum based materials like styrofoam, continuous insulation, and all of these materials that probably aren't the best health wise for you. But we're seeing a really, I'm starting to see a tide on these like more natural based healthy materials like timber HP or rock wool, or Hempatecture just came out with their own exterior continuous insulation, and they have their hemp wool bats. And if it's not, hemp, hey, how about sheep wool or whatever? Yeah, are those more expensive? Yes. And we talked about that, of it being like, hey, these practices are more expensive, but hey, if you start to get more builders and you have more quantity, then the prices are going to start to come down because it's going to increase competition, right? And some of the ideas is like, how do you help expedite that? Hey, maybe you start creating co-ops of people purchasing together to get better pricing on materials that they do want to implement. Get those like-minded builders, architects, engineers to try to help bring that cost down to help it be more palatable for the consumer.
Shout out to Milo Insulation as well with US based sorghum.
I saw that. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Someone else, after you sent that to me, sent it to me as well. I was like, okay, interesting. Looks like, those, what do you call them? Those like packing
peanuts. Yep.
Peanuts. So, I would love to see how it goes with that too, man. I think that could be a great, stopgap for us. Hey, I don't know how you do it in the walls and all that, but hey, in the attic, much better than the stuff I put up in there. So like, I'd rather have that and, some of the stuff, no dust, air quality. Like that was pretty cool. So we'd love to learn more about Milo for sure.
Yeah, and at least from the passive house standpoint, I'll go back to the Matt Risinger quote of build it tight, ventilate right, or ventilate correctly. I think any building style can be figured out, especially in an environment like Austin, as long as you're taking into account the HVAC, specifically the ventilation, especially because I think in general it's overlooked on the building aspects, especially with the new construction. I think when we look at the building codes, for me specifically, they had added a fresh air section to the building code. And so what you have most contractors do is put a 4-inch duct on the back of a return plenum. They put this timer on it and they pass the inspection. And then when the inspector leaves, they turn that ventilator off. Yep. So it was designed one way, and now you have contractors doing something else because, at the end of the day, we are really going off of the homeowner's comfort. And if they're uncomfortable in the middle of summer because it's pulling some of that fresh air in, there's enough of a pushback from your own contractors that are supposed to be following these guidelines, and you really got to look at things and see how it can be redone. So ultimately,
I would say that comes back to education. Everything comes back to education, right? Like when we talk about the fresh air intakes, I forgot who it was. Maybe it was Peter Pfeiffer. He's like a really well-known architect in Austin. It was like, yeah, you bring in that fresh air intake, but you're also bringing in all that humidity in your climate, right? So do you have dehumidifiers to deal with that? Are you properly, setting up your HVAC system? Even if people are a little bit, more science, building science based, like there's not a lot of contractors, HVAC companies, people that go, deep on that knowledge or even know how to install it sometimes, right? So at the same time, I think, you're talking about Risinger's quote. I think at the same time is you can, build it tight, ventilate right, but also we got to think about like just human nature and how we just live in a house. Most people don't even change their air filters on a normal HVAC system, right? So to give them a longer laundry list of things to do to maintain their house properly and their air system or whatever else we're putting in there for that, great. If they really care and they're passionate about it, awesome. Or, we got to have more HVAC companies that can, do the maintenance and all that stuff, for these homeowners, and if they're willing to pay for it. But I think it also comes down to like, how do we simplify our built environment in a way that, yes, you're always going to have to do some maintenance, But no matter how you live, right, you got to be conscious of that. If you just have, maybe some humidity meters, like, look, once I'm above 60, like, I got to start thinking about what I'm doing here, right? Like, definitely don't want mold growth, or how is my moisture being mitigated, or, am I leaving my doors open or whatever? Like, we just got to think about, you usually have the people who are doing passive house, or certain earthing construction at, like, in the city, usually have a decent amount of money, right? They're pretty educated, tech savvy, they kind of nerd out, especially people who are wanting to do like passive house and stuff like that. But that's fine, that market's always been there. But how do we get that to the mainstream market, the people that are buying the middle class homes, or even the lower priced homes? Like, that's been the biggest issue, right? So that's, I think, part of the equation, that we're really trying to get it to the mainstream. That's the part that makes me passionate. Is I just don't want to go to these small workshops, or go see these like multi-million-dollar passive homes, or whatever that is. Like, we got to figure out the equation of how do we get that, in Austin, like, what's a middle class home? Like, 500,000-600,000 to 2 million. That's middle class, but like, that's 2 million ish is now like the luxury price point in Austin, right? So if you're kind of like in the city, or just around the city, you're purchasing a home, 400,000-500,000 to 1.5 million or whatever. And the quality of construction of those things are like mind blowing to me, like really bad. Like, the difference between 400,000 and even some luxury homes is not that big, just much nicer finish outs. But the guts of your home is being built the same, unless like you have a really good builder and someone who cares.
And I could see from your perspective where the building code in Austin changing would start to push the envelope in these other methods, right? Because in theory, you are bringing more minds to the table to say, hey, we got to figure out how we can hit these codes. And so now they really have to do things differently and push the envelope in each direction, which furthers the education point.
Well, dude, it's like, I saw this article. I need to, confirm if, it's still true. But in the UK, they're banning spray foam in your roof. So why are they doing that? Because they probably had so many cases of something, right? Probably mold, probably issues that they couldn't see.
Yeah, the off-gassing issues.
Right? Yeah, the imperfections, right? That like help with that. And they are not banning. Insurance companies are insuring, are deciding maybe they're not going to insure properties that have spray foam in their ceiling, right? In their attic ceiling. So it makes you think, okay, like, not even from like a health perspective, just from like a cost and liability perspective, right? So how do we encourage, the city, our residences here, to really start to get educated on like, hey, this might be a little bit more burdensome, for our builders. And look, at the end of the day, the city of Austin, at least here, it is not an easy place to build, right? Like, I go to these Austin Infill Coalition meetings. It's a bunch of builders, developers, architects, real estate agents, a bunch of people who are talking about like what's going on with our city code. Because one, it's hard to deal with. Two, there's this like dichotomy of like, we want better quality construction, but at the same time, we want to expedite the process, because that's way too burdensome and costs way too much money and shouldn't be that complicated. So like, where do we find that balance of like building better quality homes, but also being able to expedite the build process, so we don't have another housing crisis? Like, if the market picks up again, we're probably going to dry up in inventory again. We're going to double our population in the next 20, 30 years. So I'm sure we're not going to have enough housing for all that. And so those are things that like we really need to start to think about, and have, well-intended people at the table talking about it.
You nailed it on a lot of different fronts. I don't know, the next one, I don't even know if we can stick to one subject, because it is all encroaching, and it's awesome the way that you one, have intertwined your passions, because I think it's awesome listening to people who are passionate about, it's not even a niche. I think, some of the topics that you're hitting on are fairly mainstream. It just, you do have such a passion for it, and you've really intertwined your life into it as well.
Thanks.
So yeah, I'm really proud of all the things that you're doing. How do people find you, Henry Valles?
Henry Valles, just look me up online, Henry Valles Austin real estate agent, realtor, broker. Instagram, Henry Valles ATX. Same thing on Facebook. Find me on LinkedIn, all the things.
Just hit you up.
Send me up. I'm willing to talk, willing to help in any way. And yeah, man, just try to make the city a better place.
Beautiful. Yeah, love it. It is a beautiful city, and there's definitely progress that can be made. But you I think could be a City of Austin ambassador with the glowing review that you gave the city. So awesome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, man. Congrats on this too. I love it.